Here we go. I will call to order the Independent Ethics Board for the City of Tallahassee. It's Tuesday, June 19th, and we are 4 hours and change into the evening. Calls to order. I will note that Ms. McNeil and Mr. Grant have excused absences. The first item on the agenda, sorry, I've been here so long and I'm still not organized, is approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any comments, questions, complaints, edits to the minutes from the last meeting?
Move approval.
Okay, we have a motion to approve them for Mr. Holloman. Mr. Smith seconds. All in favor say aye. 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 Opposed, like sign. The minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is the various components of the ethics officer report. Some of these we'll go through pretty quickly. So on item 3A, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're recognized for a summary report on your activities over the last month.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, as you all are used to, a memo detailing the various activities I've undertaken since our last meeting. So you'll see there that there have been several opportunities to present ethics education, not only to employees, but also to the youth that are participating in Tallahassee's Future Leadership Academy. So we've been doing that. Also some public presentations and obviously preparing for this meeting and others.
Okay, any questions of Ms. Meadows-Keefe concerning her activities for the last month? Seeing none, we will move on to 3B. These are the complaints that remain outstanding on the list, and we'll go through them in numeric order. So Ms. Meadows-Keefe, number 112.
Okay, number 112 is, that was the complaint that has recently been decided by the Florida Commission on Ethics. The board requested for this matter to be kept open until the Florida Commission on Ethics made a probable cause determination. A probable cause determination was reached last Friday. So it is the recommendation at this time that we go ahead and close this matter. As previously determined, we didn't have authority over it at the time, and now the referral has been accepted and is moving forward.
Okay, so remember, members, this is the complaint that involved activities related to discounts or free items. All of those activities occurred prior to this board having jurisdiction over such matters. So we've already decided, we've had a couple of shade meetings. We've decided in the past that we do not have jurisdiction. We have written a letter or two that were in the nature of training or advice to various people concerning our concerns about issues that were raised, even though they weren't technically within our jurisdiction to opine on. We had a couple of things that we were waiting for. One was to see, now I think this case is probably not over. I think that the individual involved, y'all, the lawyers here, correct me if I'm wrong, but it can still be appealed to DOA. DOA would do a recommended order to the Florida Commission on Ethics. The ALJ's recommended order, his or her findings of fact would be essentially binding on the Commission on Ethics. Conclusions of law are things that could be changed by the Commission on Ethics, but that is a tail of activities that is still waiting to be wagged. We did, as it relates to that, there was an issue of regifting of football tickets, and we asked that Ms. Meadows-Keefe at the last meeting to
122.
I'm sorry, that's all. I've jumped to 122. I will not go there just yet.
Can I clarify one thing, too?
Please do.
Okay. And I would say that, just remind the board members that in 112, what the board was concerned with and the issue the board had before it was the wedding reception discount. The board did not receive a complaint related to any other matter. It was strictly about the reception. So it was separate from those others. So I just want to be clear to delineate those.
So the point is we've kept this open mostly so that the board could see some, not final closure, but at least could see where it was going, could see the results of the Ethics Commission investigation. Does anyone have any need to maintain this as an open item? Is there anybody in the audience who wants to talk to us before Dr. Jackson, you're recognized? And again, we've got here, and I made the mistake, we've bifurcated. This is solely on the discount and not on the tickets.
Okay, solely on the discount. I also run a little bit late. I apologize with my thinking here. I don't see any reason you can't leave this open. I think they're all intertwined. You're going to hear more and more on this issue. Something that was somehow related to this is we talked about asking, I've got the documents I brought, basically we all saw the documents. There's 18 or 20 different ethical violations. The impressive thing, it took the State Ethics Commission less than 45 minutes to come up with that conclusion. So I think that says there was a whole host of things they did wrong. We, this body, sent this request over to Rick Fernandez and asked him to look into it. And as we remember, after his thorough investigation of 5-6 months or whatever, he found that he reported that only 2 individuals had tickets, and the tickets were less than $100. One thing I think this board needs to do is I would ask that they actually look into the process and how this assistant or acting city manager to come up with the conclusion that he did, one issue. And a second thing, I don't think the Ethics Commission should ever refer anything. They need to make the decision. They need to have their independent auditors, investigators looking into these things, because it was a clear cover-up. He spent 6 months and found nothing. 45 minutes, the facts were presented, and there was an 8-0 vote. So where that fits in here, that's what my thinking is. But we can't afford to have to facilitate a cover-up by the acting city manager. If there's a complaint, this committee needs to deal with it. Don't throw it back over there. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Irwin Jackson, 1341 Jackson Bluff.
Okay, so members, again, we are on the issue solely of the discount that was, this all occurred before we had jurisdiction. We do not have any new material in front of us. We have a couple times come close to closing this, but we've kept it open so that we could get see the results of the Ethics Commission. Again, I would ask the members of the board, does anybody have a desire to maintain this as an open item, or can we go ahead and close it?
It's bound to close by me.
Okay. Mr. Holloman, I'm going to take that as a motion to close, and Mr. Davis a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. So it is closed. This does not mean that if we hear about something that occurred when we had jurisdiction and that is alleged to be within our jurisdiction, we would not consider it. But as we've talked about before and been advised by our board counsel, spending a bunch of taxpayer money on an investigation for something over which we have no jurisdiction is probably unwise. And I'm getting a nod from the end of the table. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, item 117.
117, again, involves the allegations related to P cards, and I have not yet received that audit completion. So upon completion, That'll be presented to you all as an agenda item, and then that item will be closed. So my recommendation is that we maintain that open until receipt of that report.
Okay. For the purposes of some of the new attendees in the audience, we had a complaint that city purchasing cards, basically city credit cards, were being misused in some instances. We have always worked closely with the city auditor, who's while the auditor's office is part of the city, they are independent for many purposes. And speaking with them, they volunteered to do an audit of P-card usage. So we are waiting for the results of that audit, because one of the things they will look at is the specifics of the complaint. That they're doing a broader audit, but that allows us to get basically a free investigation out of them. We will see what they do, but we are awaiting the results of their audit. So we are carrying this. We've been carrying it for several months, and we'll continue to carry it. I think we're expecting something soon.
We are.
But it's just a matter of them, since we have a vacancy in the city auditor position. I think the new auditor starts July 9th.
The new auditor, Joe Malachevsky, starts on July 9th.
So congratulations or condolences to Mr. Malachevsky.
I can't believe I said the name right.
Okay, so members, you okay with just carrying this one? I'm seeing nod, nod, nod. Okay, we will do a vote on that. Item 122.
Okay, number 122 is again related to a matter that was subsequently reported and accepted for investigation by the Florida Commission on Ethics. Now, to clarify that, these allegations in this complaint are not about the city manager or the former city manager. These allegations are related to employees of the city who allegedly received football tickets. So you'll recall that citing to our board bylaws in place at the time, employees that are not appointed or elected, investigations are undertaken by the assistant city manager or city manager. The assistant city manager did perform an investigation per our bylaws. More background is that, responsive to public concern that those investigations may not be objective at all times, the board now has the option to direct me to perform those investigations, so we've mitigated for that. However, the conclusion of the board was that the board lacked jurisdiction over this issue at the time the alleged violations occurred. They occurred prior to us having the authority over misuse of position. So based on the timing of the alleged violations, there was a recommendation to close. We received the interim city manager's report, and the reason why it was not closed at the last meeting is I was asked by the board chair to perform some tasks, which I did. One was to ask the assistant city manager whether there were any other investigations undertaken by him about other employees. And having had a discussion with him about that, he investigated the complaint that we had received. So he took a look at that. So
let me interrupt. So
sure.
In terms of looking at 2 employees versus a greater number, which we've seen in the results of the Florida Commission on Ethics investigators report, some of that we need to take the hit on, because we didn't ask a broad question. We asked about 2 people, and he went. Now, should he have gone farther? That's a matter we can argue, but that wasn't. He did technically what we asked him to do in the narrow sense. Excuse the interruption.
Oh no, that's fine. And then I think the other request was that, well, actually, to draft a memo, which is an attachment, which we'll probably get to in a minute, that would guide city employees and staff members about gifts from their supervisors or managers. So with the help of the board chair, such memo has been constructed for distribution after y'all discuss it. So those were my two outstanding issues. And then also the Florida Commission on Ethics did issue an investigative report and recommendations from the advocate that talked about other employees. So the information you all were waiting on is now out there. This issue, again, is being moved forward. So my recommendation at this meeting today is to close the matter.
So, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, in the Commission on Ethics, the State Commission's investigators report, I remember there were these were tickets that the prior city manager received and then re-gifted, if there is such a word, re-gifted to city employees. And I know they talked about 8 different games. Do you remember how many employees were involved?
I don't have the report in front of me, so I'm reluctant to say a number. But there were more than the 2 that we had, and I believe there were some allegations related to perhaps some elected folks and other management level people at the city. But I just direct you to that public document for that.
Okay, so the complaints that we have heard are well received in the sense that it was multiple people in multiple games, and then of course the question is who can accept gifts, what's the value of the gifts, and how you stack up a number of tickets over a number of games. I'm not sure that again, this all occurred before we had jurisdiction over this, so we are once again between a rock and a hard place in terms of what we can do. Dr. Jackson, were you 16 people? 16 tickets. So Dr. Jackson saying there were 16 tickets. We know there were 8 from the report, 8 games, so more given to multiple city employees.
There's more than what was here. I don't have it either.
Okay, but it is in the report. So the concerns are well founded, and so what we've tried to do is think, what do we have authority to do? And so, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you want to talk to us about this memorandum?
I do, Mr. Chair. So at the last meeting, a deliverable that I was asked to bring back was this memo, and the board chair was very kind to assist in drafting same. So we intend to, or not we, if you all vote to distribute this, it will go to supervise.
What are you referring to? Which memo are you referring to?
Okay, there's a memorandum attached right after the complaint spreadsheet, and the memorandum is directed to city supervisory staff.
Okay.
You should have that in your materials.
It's a one page with number 1 through 7 at the bottom.
Yep. So I was asked to do that. The board chair helped, and we intend to distribute this if the board votes to do so. And it gives several reminders to individuals about gifts from employees between just employees together that may be peers, also between supervisors and subordinates. So we're asking that they follow the ethics code. We're asking that they follow city policy. We're reminding them about the full fair market value of a gift. And we're clarifying that we're not talking about 2 employees that want to exchange birthday gifts, that, you give me a $25 present, I give you a $25 present. We're telling employees that they should not feel compelled to either give or receive a gift. Someone may feel compelled if their boss asks them to do a thing or to accompany them to an event that somehow it's going to be detrimental to their job. If they say no, we're reminding them that they don't have to accept those, and that it's important to determine the source of a gift prior to accepting it, even if it's from your boss. So it might be a little uncomfortable, but to try to make sure you know where this gift has come from.
Mr. Holloman.
Yeah, just a couple thoughts. One, starting with the Ray line, gifts to employees from supervisory staff, okay? I looked at this, and I know we have both city policies that have to do with gifts, and we have the state law, and we have this additional layer of complication if you're a ripe person, okay? And so it seems to me that the reline is not inclusive enough, because, I mean, if somebody's a ripe and somebody who is their subordinate gives them a gift, that could be an issue, right?
Yes, so maybe it ought to be gifts to and from employees.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that,
Broad?
that it's not simply a supervisor to subordinate issue. It's a are you a ripe issue, and you know what are your obligations as a ripe, and then you know then the gift issues. So that's one thing. The other thing is I'm not quite sure how we segregate what the city policy is versus what the state law is. The state law I know deals with the ripe issues. I'm not intimately familiar with what the city may or may not have in the way of policies that govern or cover gifts among employees. I know the state law says that equal exchange thing it's not a gift. I get that, but I don't know what the city policy is, and I just want to make sure that we're covered that. And so those are really the issues that I saw in looking through this.
Well, maybe what we ought to do, the Florida Commission on Ethics has a nice, I think it's one page, might be two, but I think it's a one-pager on gifts. They have one on honoraria too, but they maybe attach that handout from them on gifts, which gives a high-level overview, and then the city ordinance is probably a half a page, and it's actually more restrictive. Now, it's not within our jurisdiction unless it's misuse, but we could also attach that, just to be clear. The idea here was not so much to call out anybody for gifts as much as it was to say, let's all be adults. If your in-laws give you a really ugly tie, you take it, you throw it in the bottom of a drawer somewhere, and you forget about it. But if you're a public employee, you don't do that, and you need to be an adult, and you need to say, no, thank you, I don't want to contribute to the boss's gift, or no, thank you, I don't want this gift from you at work. That should not be for any of us at some age. It should not be that difficult to just say, no, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Okay. Number 5 there, the bullet 5, that is actually from city policy. It's probably also from 112, but I did look at city policy, and this document, and I understand and will incorporate those good suggestions, was not intended to be a restatement of all of the things that apply, but concepts that this board saw going on with this particular situation, and things for folks to consider that may not be in policy, i.e., you shouldn't feel compelled to take a gift just because someone's giving it to you. So, I mean, this is from the board's perspective.
Yeah, this is not as much training on gifts broadly as it is trying to react to, a training type opportunity as a result of this specific allegation. Mr. Currington, you're recognized.
I apologize and I'm not sure this is the right forum for this, but this is the first I've seen this today when I got the agenda and looked at it. But just from a grammatical perspective, most of these are saying something and giving guidance. Like number 6 says it's a violation to accept a gift. Number 5 doesn't conclude anything or it doesn't say it's a violation, or it doesn't say it's prohibited, or it doesn't give guidance. So grammatically, I think if it comes verbatim from the city, I think.
Well, not all of it is from the city.
But you said number 5 was.
Well, 5 was.
Okay, so I'm just saying.
Oh.
A lot of them were your suggestions.
What is the statement saying? It says,
Right.
Okay.
Five's probably not a full sentence. There's no predicate.
I'm saying grammatically.
Or something.
Got it.
It needs a verb and a conclude. Yes. Yeah.
Predicate, whatever.
One of those. The second half of the sentence is not there. And another issue that Ms. Meadows-Keefe and I talked about is we have done letters to individual city folks. We have done broader letters to like supervisory staff. One thing that we have not done, and this might be an opportunity, is rather than us sending this out broadly to supervisory folks in the city, would be for us to send exactly this to the city attorney and say, this board feels strongly about this, and we think that you, the management of the city, ought to relay all of these concerns to your management folks, in the sense that puts us not in a position of communicating directly with people, but which may not be as good, but it does also put us in a position of saying, not only do we think this is important information to get out, but we think managers ought to manage. So that's another path we could go, rather than sending this out broadly, is send one copy to one person and say, we think you really need to do this.
The
Mr. Holloman.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would absolutely be in favor of that, but what I would send the city attorney would be much, much broader than this.
Okay.
It would address not just gifts between employees, but it would talk about gifts from lobbyists and gifts from whoever. Because I looked at that investigative file, and there's some real issues that we got to talk about.
All right. Well, let's do this. Would you be willing, between now and the next meeting, to work with Ms. Meadows-Keefe in broadening this to the point where that you're comfortable?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But I think we should talk today about some of the issues that came out in that investigative report.
In terms of gifts and the football tickets
Yes.
specifically? Well, you're recognized. Because I think that's item 122.
Okay. Well, I asked when the probable cause was found, and I'll have to caution some of our audience members that it was probable cause that was found, and that's all. There's nothing definitive that's been decided, but there was probable cause found. That's a long way from having a final determination. But because probable cause was found, the investigative file became a public record. And I asked Ms. Keefe to give me a copy of it, and she promptly did. And I reviewed the investigative file, and I read the investigative report, and part of the investigative file were the interviews of witnesses that were conducted. And after listening to one, out of a sense of just pure morbid curiosity, I continued to listen to, I won't say all, but almost all of the interviews. And I have to tell you that I am really concerned, because from the very top level of the city government, there is demonstrated an absolute non-understanding of what the role of government is and what the role of ethics in government is. There is a perception in the city, based on the interviews that I listened to, that the city is acting in some kind of entrepreneurial capacity, and that they're going to go meet their customer wherever. No matter how many Skybot tickets they have to take, they're going to go meet their customer. And no recognition whatsoever that by accepting that ticket, they're compromising their integrity, they're compromising their ethics, they're putting themselves in a position where they, at least in appearance, may owe somebody something. And there is no recognition that I heard on any of these interviews that I listened to, or that I saw in the investigative report, of any sense of remorse or any sense of that. It didn't even seem to cross anybody's mind that they might not should do this, even if the ticket only had a $100 value. So that's one issue. The other issue is the way that the investigation was conducted with respect to the 2 employees and the tickets. If you listen to the interviews, it's clear the tickets didn't come from Fernandez. They came from the lobbyist. They just happened to be delivered to Fernandez. So the investigation that was done was really not, the issue was the lobbyist gave tickets to employees that went to a football game. Not one employee gave tickets to another employee. So I'm not sure if that changes anything or not, but it certainly is a head fake that didn't, that got accepted and didn't, so the real issue never even got looked at, as far as what I can tell from reading the report that was done and then looking at the, just listening to the interviews and reading the investigative summary that was done. So I believe that we have we have a real need to some way, some manner, some form, emphasize at the highest levels of the government that ethics are important, that taking gifts from lobbyists, at least at a very minimum, creates the appearance of a problem, and that we should be aware of these things and conduct our business, that we can be entrepreneurial, but we don't have to be unethical. And if it's important that the city have employees in skyboxes, the city should buy a skybox. I mean, you shouldn't have city employees that are dependent upon taking tickets from lobbyists in order to meet their customers. I mean, I understand that there's a need in the utility business in particular to, be there for your customer, but to do the things that they want to do. I get that. But there's a disconnect between that seeming entrepreneurial spirit and the constraints that happen when you actually work in a government. There's just not a recognition of the constraints that are inherent to working in government. So somehow we have to get that message across.
Okay, I think those are great points. As an example, I would point out when the State Commission on Ethics, when the staff there are asked to travel to some event to speak, what they do, and the group that's asking for it says, we will pay for your room and board and travel. What they do is they have that group write a check to the state of Florida, which goes into their account, and then they submit, the employees at the commission submit travel requests and are reimbursed through the normal state process. So there are ways to interact with your customers, consumers, whatever, and still maintain a very scrupulous, above-board, open process.
Can we still close?
So what we will do then is this whole memorandum will get substantially beefed up. If that's okay, I'm seeing nods. We'll have it at the next meeting. We'll have some more members here. And we will redirect it to the city attorney with the statement that this board, a number of issues have come before this board. We feel strongly about all of this, both in terms of technical compliance with the law, but more importantly on appearance, in the appearance of an ethical environment, et cetera, and then we'll lay out some of some more detailed stuff than is in this memo. Does that, I'm seeing nods, does that meet with everyone's approval? Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
And Mr. Chair, I know you and I had spoken about having on the July agenda. I know all the board members received at least some of the documents from the Ethics Commission. I sent the advocates report, I sent the investigative report, and the chair's already given me the clearance to ask you all, and I might have already put it in the email, to review those documents and to come in July with suggestions, things that come to mind as you're reading that you would like to turn into recommendations either for policy changes or revisions or for ordinances you'd like to see passed. So we do want that discussion to take place. We just knew not everyone would dive in as quickly as Mr. Holloman did to do it. We want everyone to have a chance to participate in that, to digest it. So the chair and I did talk about that, and we are planning on doing that. So this actually fits really well into that.
Let me add, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, are you going to include the response from the prior city manager's attorney? I think he goes point by point through the advocate's recommendations, because I think that's important to include in our reading also.
I did provide that to everyone and ask that they review that as well. So we do want to be balanced, right, in everything that we send out.
Okay. That's where we are in terms of moving forward. As Mr. Currington has pointed out to me, clearly if we are in the making recommendations concerning staff training on items that are outside our jurisdiction or not before us, we're probably just fine in terms of our the requirements of the city charter. We may need to be a little careful in terms of offering just independent advice broadly on ethics issues. Is that a fair summary?
I think so, but let me elaborate a little bit. I do think I've heard some concern about this board's authority to communicate directly with the rank and file employees of the city. Okay, and I'm not sure of the merits or demerits of that. But by way of example, there may be two ways to alleviate that concern. One is, rather than directing this to all supervisory staff, just direct it to the city manager or the city attorney. Or alternatively, well, I think that's the primary recommendation, that we address it. Or, hypothetically, if this was called training, then I'm not sure the city would object to us distributing training directly to employees. But, okay. But I think maybe the better practice might be just to address it to the city manager or the city attorney for distribution as they deem appropriate. But, and if I might, I don't mean to get off the agenda, but I am concerned. I'm not sure we've resolved item 122 yet, right. And I did have a thought on that.
We're going to come. We're going to close it out. But if you got anybody else have anything else on this letter or memorandum? Okay, Mr. Currington, you've got a comment. We're back on 122 more broadly.
It's a rare day I disagree with Julie, but I have a concern about her recommended closure for a couple of reasons. One, this is not like the other case with the wedding discount. There we actually referred the matter to the State Ethics Board. This matter on the other employees getting tickets, I don't think we officially voted and referred it to the Ethics Board. Now, let me digress for a minute. I continue to recommend that because our ethics code had no prohibition against misuse of office or accepting gifts, it might be in personnel policies, it might be in the 10 Commandments, it may be somewhere else, but it's not in our ethics code. We don't have jurisdiction, and so I still say legally I would recommend closure. Right. But that may be tempered by whether or not we want to be consistent in our practices. If we're going to move forward on something that we don't have jurisdiction on and still refer it to the State Ethics Commission because we think it is legally sufficient as a possible violation of the State Ethics Code, as we did with the wedding gift thing, then should this board be consistent and refer this matter to the State Ethics Commission if we think the complaint that we received is legally sufficient for a violation of the State Ethics Code? And if we do refer it, then should we treat it like we did the wedding gift case and wait for the ethics, keep it open until the ethics board resolves it one way or the other? Okay. And I do agree with Mr. Holloman's statement that it's only a finding of probable cause. There's not been a trial yet.
It may have already been referred to, and we wouldn't know.
Right. Ms. Meadows-Keefe points out that if there could be a complaint sitting with the Florida Commission on Ethics, and we would have no way to know because that's all kept confidential until they do their probable cause. Mr. Holloman.
Well, I don't think it really makes all that much difference, because if we close it now and something else comes up, we can always bring it up as an issue for our agenda. We can always bring it back up. So I'm kind of indifferent as to whether we keep it open or closed. I mean, we still always have the ability to address the issues. So I'm indifferent.
Okay, well, we are on the ethics officer's recommendation to close this, realizing that we have hanging the memorandum, and that is something that we will finish next month, and with a little more gusto. We have at least one ambivalent vote. Does anybody have any of the board members? Excuse me, Mr. Currington, any of the board members have a strong feeling on closing or retaining this as an open item? No opinions. Mr. Smith.
Well, I would be in favor of closing it for now.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to take that as a motion to close. Do I get a second?
Second.
Mr. Davis, get a second. All in favor say aye. 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 Opposed, like sign. We are going to close it as it sits right now. Again, we will have the opportunity between now and the next meeting, all of us to go in more detail through, and as well as our other two members, to go through the report of the State Commission and we will see what we see in there, and if we see the basis for a complaint that we want to follow up, we can self-initiate, or we could reopen this one, I guess. That puts us to item 136. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. You're recognized. This is on 122? Okay. So I didn't have a card, so I wasn't watching for you.
And that's my fault. It was sitting on my chair over there. My name is Stanley Sims. I'm at 1320 Avondale Way. I wanted to just point out two things in regards of this particular issue. First, let me regress. The Reverend Jesse Jackson said that if I've done anything amiss to this committee from my last remarks, I would like for you all to charge it to my head and not my heart. I do value, the role that you all play here, and we can always sometimes agree to disagree. But here is something that is two things that I think is two components that I think that this system lacks, that is going to continue to perpetuate as we go down if we don't address it. And I think Mr. Holloman is pretty much on that road. And to verify my point, or to certify it, is the article that was written into the Tallahassee Democrat in regards to one city employee, the HR director, where when she received her job, it was literally in her employee packet of what is expected of her ethically. According to the Tallahassee Democrat, it was literally laid out. We looked there into our paperwork that was fine. I haven't seen the memorandum that has been drafted with Ms. Julie by her, but here's something that I have been, and my wife may even just kill me, because my wife has been working for the city of Tallahassee for over 20 years. And Mr. Holloman, something you said to me, something you said this afternoon is that really touched my inner spirit, is when you're listening to these testimonies, there is something that has to be inside a city employee with the ethical guidance, that just whether we have the right memo or not, does the perception of this look right? 20 years ago, when my mom used to work right across the street, whereas Andrews used to be the old personnel office, where it was unethical, Mr. Holloman, when my mom wanted a job, they would say, is anybody going to get that job? That was unethical, but we knew this was going on. And over time, we've kind of fallen away and accepted. And so I think we need a mechanism to auto-correct. And I apologize, I may a little long, but I'm getting there. Mr. Caesar, I think that auto-correct is an independent investigator. And the reason why I say because when you say an independent investigator, Ms. Julie, the reason why I say that, and I don't mean you, because you have too many social issues with these other city employees as well, that I believe sometimes you're not objective, where even in my circumstances, where it's beyond the board, you have not been objective because you have a personal working relationship. And I don't mean that you're being biased or you intend to, but I just believe that seeing these people every day 8 hours, it does. You see them in a different light, that you don't think that they would pull kids out of the hands of border you wouldn't think that President Trump might do that. But these people may do some things that are being heard in those recordings from there. So I think, Mr. Holloman, it's not the language, because upper management here has really demonstrated that they know how to tiptoe around the language. But when it comes to a hardcore investigation, as we noticed that our interim city manager, he did a 6-month investigation, put those tickets at $100. For you two FSU students, that's skybox tickets, free liquor, and free food at an FSU game. They want you to believe that you can go to an FSU game, sit in a skybox for $100. Your interim city manager wants you to believe that. That's not going to happen. And so when we have an independent investigator who does not know the HR director or any of these other people, who are literally going to investigate the facts like they did me, an ex-felon, when they say, Stanley, did you write that bad check or did you break that law? They looked at the facts. They didn't care who was my mama or who were my daddy, who I worked for. And so I apologize for my lengthiness. And Mr. Davis, I really want to thank you for those little words you said about, it just kind of gave me hope. And you too, Mr. Heron, is because it's very frustrating when we see all of this energy goes in to protect what you and I, as we sit in these chairs, know behavior was unethical, but we got to find a legal way to say it. And what they did was it was wrong, but we didn't say it was wrong until after you did it, even though you knew when you were doing it was wrong. And so I just want to implore this board that we look at not just whether or not we get the language right, Mr. Holloman, but we also put in a package of says that backs the language up. You understand what I'm saying? Where they know that, because according to the FBI, these people don't talk. Upper management, the city manager is not going to lie on, the assistant city manager is not going to lie, or not going to, they're going to not talk. And so the best way to break this corruption down is through hardcore evidence. And so the only way we can ever get hardcore evidence, Mr. Davis, if we have someone who has no influence tied to the people involved that are conducting the investigation. And I know I'm wearing this point down, but until this ethics office has an independent investigator like the state,
Subpoena power.
you know, because right now any complaint that comes in here, upper management can pretty much tell you the outcome of it, because they're going to know what type of information they're going to let Julie have and what type of information they're going to hold from her. Thank you for your patience with me.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Okay, so we are on item 136. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Okay. Number 136, actually both of these, the board's given me some latitude to do desk closures. Both of these were related to non-city entities. So in 136, this caller had a complaint about the higher educational facility where he worked. I don't even believe that it was in Florida. So I responded to the complainant and explained to him what my role is. So I went ahead and closed that case because the board has no jurisdiction over that particular university system out of state. The board has no objections to that.
Okay. No problems with that? Item 137.
Same kind of facts, but this caller lived here in town and had been fired from her job at Walmart, and for some reason she thought that this was the appropriate office to call. And again, I explained to her that I related only to the city and that I'd need to close the matter. So I'm just asking for y'all to.
Again, without objection. That moves us to item 3C, our budget. You can see the expenses seem to be holding pretty much flat, minor variations. from month to month, but virtually the just flat expenditure pattern for expenditures by this board. Any questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none. Item 3D. This is our blue sky, which we will begin within another month or two to break out. So to the extent that anybody has anything that they think needs to change in terms of city ethics, in terms of this board's jurisdiction or authority, or in terms of this board's activities, this is the list to put it on, because we're going to go through all the items. I would ask Ms. Meadows-Keefe if she would start to kind of group these into logical items, because we may need to divide it up into those subcommittees of one, and so that each of us can take 3 or 4 or 5 of them, and if they're logically grouped, that would help.
Okay.
And I would like to add 2 things to this. One is the current misuse of position ordinance still has corruptly, and I think we should have on the list removing corruptly and inserting intentionally and knowingly. And also related to misuse of position ordinance, I believe now it's limited to officers and officials, and I think we should have on the list expanding it to all city employees. And then the second item I'd like to put on the list is identifying opportunities for the board to serve in a watchdog role. For instance, we have started and have coming up here shortly a review of the requests for public records that the city has received over the prior month. That's an opportunity for us to kind of mine to see if there's some area where we didn't get a complaint, but there's something the board would like to pursue. There may be other things like that, I don't know, but I think that kind of broad concept of us serving that watchdog role beyond the specifics of complaints that come to, we don't always wait for something to come to us, that concept ought to be on the list somewhere.
Okay. Do you want to take suggestions from the public about the blue sky list?
And sure, and I would also say if anybody in the audience has recommendations for our blue sky list,
You can send them to me.
we send them. You can speak in our meetings, or you can send them in between meetings to Ms. Meadows-Keefe. This is a list, I guarantee you, when it's done, that we will not do all of them. There will be some that will conflict with each other, but we will do whatever the majority of the members of this board want to, we will do. We will recommend whatever a majority of the members of this board want to recommend off the list. And in most cases, as we've done in the past, Mr. Currington, we'll be probably drafting language. If it's proposed ordinance change, we'll be actually drafting language so we know very precisely what it is we're recommending, and have something when we give it to the City Commission that is extraordinarily measurable. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
I would say also, if you have suggestions, you can send them to ethics@talgov.com, and I'll put them on this list, and they'll appear next month. And Mr. Chair, this is responsive to a comment that a member of the public made. One thing that we also lack as a board is subpoena authority.
That's on the list.
Okay, so I think that is on the list. Okay.
So, that said, we're going to take our break a few minutes early since we started late. We're going to take our break now and come back. I think that much of this will go fairly quickly. So we can take about a 10, 15-minute break right now. Okay, we are back from our break. We good in the back? I got a thumbs up sticking around the door. All I saw was a thumb.
Okay.
So we are good. We are on something.
You're on
Item
the public
3E.
And I believe item 3E is the
This is the big list of
public records requests.
public records requests that the city has received over the course of the last month. And the next spreadsheet behind it is a more select list. Can we just move, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, can we move straight to the shorter list?
Yes.
Because I think it covers the things that would fall within the interest of this group, unless anybody has an objection and wants to go over the however many 9 pages of the first spreadsheet. Okay, so the second spreadsheet that says public records request at the top and starts with 218-282, or item, the rows are numbered 35 through 50-something.
Yeah.
See if I can turn a page. 53. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you want to walk us quickly through this? And I note for the audience, there are a number of items here that are duplicates. There are 2 or 3 that relate to airport parking. There are 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 7 that relate to the federal subpoena. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Okay, I don't know if in the past I've gone through all of these, but
And just hit highlights.
okay. Generally, you'll see that the board did ask me at the last meeting, and this is coming up next, I think, you'd asked me to follow up on some airport issues. And then you'll see most of them you have seen news stories about because a lot of the requestors are reporters. So, you know, ongoing issues involving the FBI investigation and different issues that you all have heard about in the past. So, as you know, there were some subpoenas that recently were issued, so copies of that, and then things like bid information, et cetera.
Okay, on item row 51, 2018-343, it's a bid request. Do you remember what that was about?
I do not, but I think it may be. Now, I'm speculating, and I really don't wish to do that. But
Well, then don't.
Okay, I think it might be.
It's
waste.
not on. Is it on the other
I
list?
think it may be waste. Let me see.
Nope. The other list has the same thing. Okay. Is there anybody on here? Is there any item on this list that has captured anyone's attention? And obviously, we know that, and we await with bated breath the results of whatever the FBI is going to do, and the next item 4 on the agenda will be the parking, which we're going to follow up on a bit. Anything else on here that anybody wants to discuss? Seeing none, item 3F is the campaign contribution refund and update on that. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Okay. This should be in your June power bill. As you know, the city puts into the power bill and even in your electronic bill, if you receive it that way, information related to various city functions. So communications worked to work up this document that's going to be in the power bills. If they haven't gone out already, they will, to help raise awareness of it. I'll also say that candidate forums are coming up, and if any of y'all know of candidate forums that involve city candidates, please let me know so that I can put that on my calendar. And if one of y'all aren't going to be there, I went to a bunch of candidate forums last time. Oh, you're pointing at Marilyn Wills, so I'm going to count on you to make sure I know so I can come and talk about the program if you're not. But covering that is real important, and I have been communicating with candidates as they have filed about the program.
Okay. Questions, Ms. Meadows-Keefe? Item 4 is our Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped,
go over
I
that.
skipped the last one. This is, I'm sorry, item 3G, which I'm desperately here trying to skip, is the, some ethics training that we had nothing to do with. The city brought in a high-level ethics trainer. Now, these were, what they did was pose kind of ethical conundrums. It's not specific to Florida law, but they were trying to get people to think about their day-to-day jobs. So Ms. Meadows-Keefe has some knowledge of this, and she's going to tell us what they did.
I do. I want to just clarify that I did not arrange for this speaker. I did not speak. Actually, the interim city manager arranged for this individual to come it's the City Managers Association, and they're located in right outside D.C. And I was able to catch kind of the tail end of the education. And what I liked about what I saw is by bringing in the outside educator and not having me do the education, I think the thought process was that the leadership team could more freely talk about dilemmas they may face on a daily basis without feeling like the principal's in the room kind of thing. And when I kind of snuck in and sat in the back, there was some very good discussion going on, and I appreciated the engagement that I saw on the behalf of the leadership team. And I'll point out that all members of the leadership team were there, maybe not 100%, but the city manager did require them to come, and it was 3 hours of pretty intensive training where they did go through each of these scenarios and talk about possible solutions. So I will say that the interim city manager has placed a priority on ethics education and did start with the leadership team and did make this effort, and it was very high quality education. Also, just a fact that in order for the city employees to get the proposed raise this year, they are being required to complete the online ethics education that this board has seen. There's an online education module that has you get educated on various ethical issues. There's a quiz attached to it. And again, you have to complete that if you want your raise. And so that's an incentive for them to complete it. And that's in addition to the other things that I do monthly.
Okay. Any comments, questions? I would just note that clearly the city takes a broad view of ethics, except when they're thinking about our jurisdiction.
You had to get that
No
in there.
offense to anyone. Props to the city, by the way. This was a great stuff. And as I read through it, I was thinking I was glad I was not one of the people in one of those conundrum situations.
And they're all true. They're all true.
All tough.
Yep.
You could see where good could be done if only you did a little bit of bad along the way. Item 4, the issue has come before us about how airport parking passes are used, awarded, et cetera, et cetera. Not so much in the nature of a complaint as just something that we have wanted to understand, because it is something that it seems like could be related to ethics in terms of either misuse or gift provisions or whatever. So this is really an education moment where Ms. Meadows-Keefe's going to tell us what she's been able to find out about airport parking passes, which I would note are not just given to city employees, but are given to other high-level government type people like your boss and my boss. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
You've stolen my thunder already, because that was going to be part of it.
That was intentional.
That's okay. You're just trying to make it short. And this is the ethics moment for this month. We decided to make it very practical. And I do want to clarify and emphasize what the chair indicated was that the board has not received a complaint related to the parking passes. So I've had some media inquiries and interviews asking that question, and no. But what I did point out to one reporter is that this board is proactive and to the extent that this has been an issue that's been written about and raised as a concern, the board wanted more information about it. So that's what you have. Therefore, I spoke with the interim director of the airport, Mr. Pollard, and asked him to provide any documents that he may have had related to the parking passes. And there was basically a paucity of written materials related to that. Apparently, it's been a rather long-standing practice here that various dignitaries, I guess, if you want to call them that, get these passes. So this includes presidents of universities, this includes county officials, commissioners, etc. Obviously, some folks that work at the airport, appointed officials here in the city, and elected officials within the city. And when you receive a position that qualifies you for one of these passes, you get a letter, which I've included with the board's materials, that basically says, enclosed, please find your sticker. And if you have difficulties, here's who to call. And it does not really tell you in that letter any limits on that. So it just says, hey, here is this thing, and you can park in short or long term and enter and exit without having to pull a ticket. And then there is some another illustration of signage that helps you identify where to put the sticker on your vehicle and where to enter and exit. Sorry. The next item that's included for your information, I did do some research on state law related to how airport authorities are established and governance of airports. And then the board chair very kindly said, well, the city also has ordinances on the airport, and duh. So I pulled those, and what I was able to see is that this airport is run, the city manager is over it, although there's a director of the airport. The rules, standards, and regulations are adopted by the city manager, and fees are adopted by the management of the city, and parking enforcement is relegated to the city and to the manager. So the airport is in charge of its own parking, but the city manager is over the airport. The next item.
But before you get to that, I would note that as we looked at this, it appears to be common for airport authorities to give out passes to local folks who might have particularly some political influence, which I suspect might be related to trying to draw airlines to the airport. And, you know, anybody who's got a little oomph that could help the airport operate. It seems to be without anybody ever saying that, from what I've seen, that seems to be kind of the source of the desire to hand out passes.
So I did look broadly at that particular issue as well, and did find that airports throughout Florida and indeed the country do routinely offer these passes. That's not to opine in any way, shape, or form on the propriety of same. It's just a standard kind of practice that certain people get to park for free at airports. The next item that I pulled, and again, this is not to opine on this issue, it simply is to reflect that the Florida Commission on Ethics, I believe this is from the 90s. I don't have the date here on it, but
I think it was either 92 or 93.
Right, it's a rather older case, but I believe it's still a valid discussion of, these were legislators receiving certain items from various governmental agencies, and these included airport passes. So they basically are talking about gifts. Parking is a gift. Okay, so you can say that parking is a gift. And in this case, the Hillsborough Legislative Delegation was receiving these parking passes. And Some of these are okay as long as you can show that there is a public purpose for your trip that relates to the office that you are currently occupying. So if I'm flying out in my capacity as, say, the city manager to go to a conference of other city managers, use of that pass under this analysis seems like, and I'm not using my legal brain, I'm just reading, that may be okay. I did take this, however, and forward it to the city attorney for her review and recommendations on that, so that, you know, she could potentially provide guidance on that issue.
And I can say I've talked to a couple of people in other jurisdictions who get parking passes because of their position, and what they have uniformly told me is that they use them very specifically for business-related purposes, but not for anything else. So if they're going on a family vacation, they park in paid parking, and at least one of them told me that he uses the parking pass to park in the space that you can only park with a parking pass, but then as he's leaving, he pays for parking. So all he's getting is a preferred space, but he said he didn't even feel comfortable that he wanted to go ahead and pay for it. This opinion does go ahead and say that if you if you took a 3-day trip every month for 12 months, that would be 12 gifts, assuming that parking for 3 days exceeded $100, that you'd have to report it.
But if it doesn't, you don't. So if you're on like a 2-day trip, you don't have to report it.
So it gets into the technicalities of gift giving, but this was an interesting opinion, and to the extent that we would ever need to look at parking permits, I think now we have some background and know what we're talking about.
This was just for information, right?
Right.
Okay. Mr. Jackson has something.
Yes, sir, and I have a card from Mr. Butzine, too.
Pardon?
Dr. Jackson.
Thank you. I think what the problem is, I think he has a good presentation. No one is going to be out there monitoring how many times Andrew Gillum goes here, find out why he's going, where he's going, monitor when he comes back. Okay, we have politicians. Our biggest problem is we need to stop treating them like a superhuman God figure. Why does I know they give him, that's a little perk for being mayor. He gets paid for being mayor. We have to say, stop the perks. You can walk, you can stand in line, you can buy your own car, okay, just like the rest of us. We're part of we're part of the biggest problem that we have as us, because we give them these things. We tell them these things. You make it so complicated. I can make it very simple. You say no parks, no car parking for anybody other than emergency vehicles, period. Okay. Don't send that letter out to anyone else. Send them a letter saying this is is a gift, and we would highly recommend you stop this practice. The $100, okay, that's your problem. It shouldn't be $100. It needs to be $0, because people know if they're taking more than $0, okay, that's not a glass of water, okay, if a bottle of water. If it's a cup of water, well, okay, that's okay, but that's $0. I don't think anyone, and I'm on occasion to file a complaint. I'm not filing a complaint on a cup of water. Okay. We need to make this very clear. We can't hire people to track down. If you say, oh yeah, 8 trips okay, well, how about 35 trips? If you say, how about a cup of water? How about a $200 bottle of some kind of wine or bourbon? My only thought, make it simple, stupid. It was an old saying, not referring to anyone up here, but
yes,
that made good sense to me back in the 60s. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Butzine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Peter Butzine with Common Cause and Citizens for Ethics Reform. I would like to point out that in addition to the ethics issue, which I'll address in a second, there's an unaddressed issue here about accepting free airport parking. In doing so, I would argue that Mr. Gillum has received an in-kind contribution for his gubernatorial campaign. And I know you're all happy that you don't have to enforce Chapter 106, but if you did, I would say that Mr. Gillum is maybe violating Chapter 106 of Florida statutes if he fails to report this free parking as a political contribution. And then that begs the question, probably a more important question is it appropriate that the city of Tallahassee is subsidizing a campaign for its mayor to run for governor? And I would argue that it doesn't. This is not an appropriate expenditure of taxpayer funds, and it is, even though it's not a direct expenditure, we are all subsidizing this by paying $11 a day for long-term parking at the city of Tallahassee airport. Now, I would argue that there's no question that commissioners should be reimbursed for airport parking associated with their official duties. However, free parking for personal use is a special benefit that's unavailable to the rest of us, our average citizens. And it makes just about as much sense as providing commissioners with free utilities because the city owns a utility system. Julie's ethics moment included the document stating that Hillsborough County's free parking is considered a gift, and I would agree with that, and I would say that conclusion also should apply to the city of Tallahassee. An unanswered question is who precisely benefits from this policy. We know from the Tallahassee Democrat, from its reporting, that the list includes the presidents of Tallahassee Community College, FAMU, and FSU. It also includes commissioners. It also includes a vague reference to other public officials. But who else? Who all of those groups, all of those individuals and groups, by virtue of their office, who receives this benefit? How much revenue does the airport and ultimately Tallahassee citizens lose from this policy? Now, I would oppose this gift as an inappropriate benefit that's available to commissioners, while the rest of us are expected to pay $11 a day, pretty high parking fees for the privilege of securing a long-term parking spot at Tallahassee's airport. Nevertheless, this perk to commissioners, I would argue, probably may not rise to the level of egregious conflict of interest, at least for commissioners. However, I would point out that the presidents of Florida State, FAMU, and TCC do indeed conduct business before the city, and extending this perk to them, plus others unknown like them, who benefit from this city's largesse, presents at a minimum the appearance of a conflict of interest. Our parking fees in Tallahassee are high, particularly compared to Valdosta, where parking is free, and Jacksonville, where daily parking is as inexpensive as $5 a day. And I'm cheap enough that I drive to Valdosta and Jacksonville in order to avoid having to pay $11 a day at the city of Tallahassee airport. Now, my understanding is that these parking fees are high because they subsidize landing fees for airlines that serve Tallahassee. Now, we could argue whether this is an appropriate public purpose, but in my mind, there's no doubt that whatever the purpose, it should be shared by all citizens, and that includes the city commissioners and the others who receive this perk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patzine. Comments, questions from board members? Seeing none, I suspect this will not be the last time we talk about this particular issue. While we're on ethics moment, I want to suggest something for Ms. Meadows-Keefe to put on for next month. I was going through all of I print out everything before these meetings like a Neanderthal, and I have notes all over my agendas and such, and I was going through and getting ready to throw out 3 years worth of them, and realized that maybe I couldn't throw them out because they might be public records. So I went to the Attorney General's good product on public records and open meetings, and found a couple of pages that were relevant. I'm going to ask Ms. Meadows-Keefe if she will share that with us next time. It is clear that if I make a note on the agenda that Ms. McNeil and Mr. Grant are excused for the meeting, and I announced that at the meeting. That is a transitory note, and I can dispose of it. If I make a note just for myself to cement something in my head by writing it down, but I'm never going to convert it into any formal bit of writing or convey it to anyone else, it's transitory and I can get rid of it. But if it has archival value to me to come back to, or if it's the beginnings of a memorandum that I might think I need to write, then I do need to keep it. So just to keep all of us straight on public records, we will touch on that next month, in addition to whatever else Ms. Meadows-Keefe wants to put in her ethics moment, and I will share that document with you.
Thank you.
It's brief. It's only about 2 pages long, but it covers the key cases.
Okay.
Mr. Currington, you are on this. We ask you to look at campaign activities by board members, not knowing, but thinking either members of this board or members of some future board might want to get involved in local campaigns. And if there were guidelines for that as board members, and or how involvement in a campaign might affect a board member's subsequent ability to sit on this board and opine about someone on whose campaign they worked. So, Mr. Currington, you're recognized for your 22 points.
Thank you. I must preface my comments. You each have in front of you a 13-page memo, but hopefully to your relief, I'm going to focus on page 2, where I start with 22 talking points. I've learned over the years as a practicing lawyer, courts want your rationale and your legal reasoning, and then you reach a conclusion after you've argued your reasoning. I have learned most clients, they just want the conclusion, and they may or may not be interested in the reasoning, depending on whether they like your conclusion. So I'm going to bypass the reasoning and logic and basically make that a footnote and address 22 points. And you can follow along with me. They're numbered 1 through 22, and I'm going to give an abbreviated version of them, okay? Before I got to the 22 points, I say that you act as quasi-judicial officials when you adjudicate ethics complaints. So you are like judges, essentially, okay? So my first point, conduct yourselves essentially as judges do. What do judges do? Number 2, avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in all your activities. 3, be impartial and unbiased towards the parties. Act at all times in a manner that promotes public confidence in the integrity and impartiality of this board. What is the standard for disqualifying an official, a judge, a quasi-judicial official who acts and adjudicates matters when the appearance of impropriety or unbiasedness is violated? The answer is in number 4, that a person can be disqualified or the allegation is legally sufficient if facts are alleged that would prompt a reasonably prudent person to fear that she could not get a fair and impartial trial. You as board members, if someone were to ask you to recuse yourself as a judge, you must decide whether to disqualify yourself assuming all the facts to be true. You cannot deny facts. You must assume them all to be true. There is no case law regarding this board, but obviously there is plenty of case law with regard to the disqualification of judges or the recusal of judges, pretty much interchangeable terms. Again, so the test is whether or not the behavior would create a well-grounded fear that the party will not receive a fair trial at the hands of a judge. I'm going to skip to number 8 because there's a little bit of repetition here, I think, or redundancy. So let's talk about some practical advice now. I am saying in number 8, that you may want to temper your political activity so that you do not jeopardize the public perception that you are less than independent, impartial, and unbiased. Obviously, the concern is if you get too heavily into a political campaign and by way of example become a campaign treasurer for a candidate, the case law says you can recuse a judge for that because that's just too close. You're too tight. You can't be unbiased or impartial. And the case law talks about cumulative facts. One incident may not be enough to recuse you, but a combination of circumstances may then tip the scales in favor of recusal. Number 9, just be aware that if you get politically active during this season, you may be required to abstain or recuse yourself if the candidate you are supporting gets elected and eventually appears as a respondent in an ethics complaint. Number 10, it's important to know that our bylaws, if you run, apply, or are appointed to be an officer or employee of local government, and I emphasize local, not state government, you will at some point have to choose between taking the position and staying on this board, because our bylaws prohibit you being in both capacities. You must resign immediately upon filing for candidacy for a city public office. So again, you might run for a county office, you might run for a state office, and you may not have to resign or resign immediately. On the other hand, if you apply for a city position or whatever, you may have to resign upon being appointed to that position or officially taking office. But if you run for a city public office, you must resign upon qualifying. Number 11, you may not use your position or attempt to use your position or any city property or resources to secure a special privilege or benefit for any candidate. That's closely followed by number 12. Do not use city staff, facilities, materials, or resources in furthering your support for a candidate. Okay? You shouldn't be using a city car or city stationery or anything else in your efforts to support your candidate. Number 13, you should not use your title or authority for personal benefit. My advice to you is if you decide to support a candidate, you should make it abundantly clear that you are acting in your individual capacity and not your official capacity. You should not even allude to your stature or status as a board member, because I think people will infer things from that. And please understand that even when you declare that you are acting in your individual capacity and not your official capacity, that will not stop certain individuals from filing a complaint and inferring. So you're not immunized just by making it clear that you're acting in individual capacity. So what I say is, even following this guidance, you may not be completely insulated from any accusation that you somehow misused your position, such as in knowing that your name recognition as a board member alone resulted in a special benefit to the candidate. So if people know that the chair is the chair of this board and he supports John Doe arguably is getting the endorsement of the chair of the board ethics board. And even though you don't say that, it's general knowledge, it's in the public domain, and someone can allege you knew it when you supported that candidate. Number 14, you cannot contribute more than $250 per election to one candidate. 15, you may claim a maximum $25 refund for contributions only to candidates for the mayor and city commission. Other candidates, you don't get a refund. So if you support a local state legislator candidate, no refund. 16, although I am not here to educate you on the entire election code, I did feel certain things were worth pointing out. It is unlawful, literally a crime, to discharge or threaten to discharge an employee for voting or not voting in any election. So you cannot employ or threaten your employees here. So Julie and Lucy ought to be safe.
I threaten her.
Number 17, you cannot use your official authority to influence or coerce or influence another person's vote or interfere with that person's vote. Now, the the election code does say that you may suggest to another employee in a non-coercive manner that he or she may be voluntarily contribute to a campaign, but I encourage great caution here. You may think you're acting in a non-coercive manner, but it's very easy for an employee to infer coercion or alleged duress, like you see in sexual harassment cases. So it's a very fine line, and I do advise great caution there if you're going to talk to other people about how they vote. Number 18, you cannot participate in any political campaign for an elective office while on duty. What is on duty? That's a little unclear. I mean, right before this meeting or right after meeting, if you go out into the audience and say who you're supporting, you know, that's getting close. You know, I don't know if you're on duty or not, but I would just, again, be very cautious. This law is really designed for employees who are on their state job, you know, and you can't lobby or campaign on the state phone during work hours. Number 19, nothing should be deemed in these criminal laws, for example, to prohibit any public employee from expressing his or her opinion on any candidate or issue, or from participating in any political campaign during the employee's off-duty hours. So after hours, you can certainly say that you like Amendment 7 or you don't like Amendment 7, or you support a particular candidate after hours. Number 20, you cannot solicit money in a state building. Again, some of these were designed to protect state workers, but you, in supporting your candidate, should not go into any state facilities, or in this case, any city facilities. It's got to be a government entity building. You cannot solicit it in government buildings. Again, it doesn't prohibit non-coercive voluntary communications, but again, that's that fine line in the workplace where I would encourage you to be very, very cautious. Because again, it's easy for an employee to say they were coerced. Number 21, I recommend that you avoid collecting campaign contributions or acting as campaign treasurer. Case law has suggested that is sufficient to recuse a judge or disqualify a judge. Just as a catch-all, you can support and vote for whoever you like. You obviously don't give up your First Amendment rights by taking a seat on this board. I do have a lot of footnotes, in essence, or endnotes, and I cite a number of election code statutes, but more importantly, a lot of case law about judicial qualifications. So if you want me to elaborate, I can do that, or you can read the endnotes, and I can field questions now, if you like.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Currington? What I'd like to do, Ms. Meadowskeef, is I'd like to just put this on next agenda since we'll have two other members, to re-raise the issue after people have had a chance to read it if they have any questions. Okay. So it won't be a presentation, Mr. Currington. It will just be an opportunity for questions after we've had a chance to digest, because I will admit I have not read this yet, other than I read along with you on the 22 points.
So you want to see this just as an informational item so people have a chance to review it and ask Mr. Currington any questions?
Exactly.
Got it.
And I would note for the record that although it doesn't affect our quorum, Mr. Butzine is excused. We are on item 7.
Okay, this item number 7, we have been talking for several months about raising awareness of the ethics and fraud hotline. This has been in existence for years before I got here. It was initially run by the auditor. The hotline number is 891-8813. I give that number out all the time. So one of the things that is a best practice, if you're going to have a hotline in an organization, is that you are duty-bound to remind folks that the hotline exists. So one technique that's used not only in government but in corporate entities that have to comply with different federal law is that you send out an email periodically to remind employees about the hotline. I do train on it. I do tell all new employees about it, but my plan is to just speak to the interim city manager and say that I intend to send this draft email to all mailboxes in the city so that everyone gets this reminder about the hotline. I've got other activities that I plan to do to continue to raise awareness about it, because awareness of an issue is obviously the first step to solving it, and we do want to be very proactive in trying to get these complaints. So I just wanted for you all to have a chance to see this before I hit the send button and talk to this interim city manager.
Okay, comments or questions, Ms. Meadows-Keefe?
And it is our job
Yes,
to run the hotline, just by the way. We're given that authority in the charter.
Right. This is one that, under anybody's view, would come from us, I think.
Correct.
My only comment is on the second bullet at the bottom of page 1, I would strike the word other, because that kind of presupposes that the person, the complainant, has named themselves, and they may just want to say, and there are these 5 witnesses, and they put their name in as number 3 if they want to do an anonymous complaint.
Got it.
All right. Everybody's okay with this? Item 8 is Ms. Meadows-Keefe's going to tell us about our July and August board meetings.
Okay, so just to let everyone know that after the July City Commission meeting, they're going on a break for July and August, as you know, and they're going to be utilizing that time to do some retrofitting and work on the commission chamber, okay? So we will not be able to meet here in July and August, and this is the only place where we can televise our meetings, okay? So I'm just letting everyone know in a transparent fashion that these meetings will not be broadcast in July and August. That's not to say we can't like set up a Facebook Live or do a YouTube, but we are going to be meeting not in this room. Next month we are in the Tallahassee room, which is right over there down the hall. It's a much smaller room, so just be aware of that. And we should be back broadcasting in September. So the chamber needs some renovation to comply with ADA, and that's why we won't be doing it.
Okay, going back to our roots, I think that's where our first meetings were.
Yes.
The good old days. Item 9, this is a memo that reminds RIPEs, reporting individuals and procurement employees, about their responsibilities concerning their financial disclosures, which I would remind everyone are due, although you've already gotten 17 reminders from everybody in the world. Their financial disclosures are due July 1. So, Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Yeah, yes, and just in case anyone hasn't done it yet, the Supervisor of Elections office is no longer downtown. If you're wanting to file that in person, it's down on Appalachie Parkway and Capitol Circle. They moved into the old Big Lots. So don't go down to where it was last year because it's not there anymore. You have to drive down Capitol Circle. So this memorandum was one that looks familiar to you, and it should, because we distributed it earlier this year. However, it was pointed out by the Deputy City Attorney's Office that the terms that we utilized in that memo were not as precise as we would have liked. It doesn't particularly change the meaning of it, but our folks are not reporting, we're not procurement employees. They are instead purchasing agents. Purchasing entities, I keep saying it wrong, are creatures of state law. Municipal and local employees are purchasing agents. So we are just clarifying the use of that language to make it cleaner and more precise. The meaning is not really changed at all through this interpretation. It's just using the right term.
Okay, a procurement employee arguably could be broader because it could be somebody who evaluates a bid
Right.
proposal, whereas a procurement employee actually has spending authority.
Yep, up to $20,000. So
Okay.
we're just making that
So
revision.
this is cleaning up our prior activity.
Yes.
There's that.
Oh,
I
thank
had
you.
it somewhere. Who have I not? Mr. Baines. I have. I'm going to jump to non-agenda items if you want to go.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, board members. Curtis Baines, 1323 East Tennessee Street. In the interest of full disclosure, I want to tell you that I intend to seek Tallahassee seat 1 in 2020. So this is not politically expedient at this point, because I hope by the time that election comes around, all of our ethical issues would have been resolved and we can move on with other city business.
We love optimism.
But I've only been here a couple of times over the last 5 years, I guess it is. And so I really kind of see this from an outside perspective. I don't want to step on your independence or anything like that, but I do want to share with you some of my concerns that I've seen over the last few years. Some of those I have heard this afternoon, talking about things that are outside your jurisdiction and things for which you have no authority, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and it happened then and it happened here. And I am not burdened by a legal education, and I know a lot of you are. So let me use a layman's term to describe this situation. It's horse hockey. I believe the citizens of Tallahassee intended to create a very strong ethics board. Now, I can't speak for what everything they did, but I know when we were talking about all of this through all of the ethics panel discussions that were trying to put all this together, I certainly had a very different expectations for this group, and quite frankly, this ain't it. What I thought was that I know we've tried to strengthen the ordinance a little bit earlier this year, and I know you've got some blue sky list of recommendations you're compiling, and I would certainly urge you to continue that. And what I would like to see is a comprehensive ordinance that provides a unitary system, not with the city and then with the state, but a unitary system where this board can handle any complaint, any accusation for any violation of Chapter 112, of any violation of the city's ordinance, of the city's ethics ordinance, of any violation of any other municipal ordinance. A comprehensive system for dealing with questions of ethics concerning city employees. I spent 30 years on with the state. If I had ever taken a gift from a lobbyist, that would have been the end of my career, period. Now, I hope that you will move forward. I know there have been arguments and complaints about double jeopardy and eternal ethics hell and whatever else there might be. That's certainly not what I imagine. I imagine we'd have a system, one system here at the city where these ethics issues can be resolved, and I hope that's where we get to, and I hope you will put together an ordinance that will set that out clearly and make it a comprehensive ordinance. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Baines. I will point out that Mr. Currington has several times suggested to us that if the city simply adopted the state ethics code as our jurisdiction as being at least as broad and broader in some instances, that we would have an entire body of law that we could rely on to interpret it. I don't know that the city by ordinance can give us the authority to look at something and take it away from the state commission. I don't think the city can do that. It would have to be the state. And right now, the law provides for the State Ethics Commission and such local commissions as may be established, but it doesn't let certainly you can come back, it does not let a city or county establish a commission that can overrule the state commission. You can just push Dr. Jackson.
Yeah, I was just pushing him aside there. And that part I understand. When you were created, when this was being discussed, the idea was to strengthen our ability to deal with ethics violations. The state, I mean, it happened to take one this time. Typically, 95% of the complaints with the State Ethics Commission are ignored. They're just disregarded. And the idea was to try to strengthen a local one. And I think that if we get a sufficiently strong local ordinance, it will eliminate the need to try to go over to the state ethics. I understand what you're saying, and I certainly, you can't rewrite state law, but I think if we have that system here, it will be sufficient.
Well, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, for our blue sky list, I think an element of what Mr. Baines is saying is that we ought to consider, right now the ordinance says that we cannot take up an ethics issue if it is before the state commission. Now, that would assume that we know it's before the state commission, but maybe we ought to have on the list removing that provision from the city ethics ordinance.
That's what it says. It says something, but I don't know if it's exactly that, but I understand.
You understand, just so that we're not limited, because I don't think it is double jeopardy. If I murder someone during a bank robbery, I think the state or the feds can prosecute me, and I don't know that I've crossed into double jeopardy, although it's been a long time since I took that class, and the law may have changed in the last 75 years. Dr. Jackson.
I have 5 things real fast. One, Mr. Holloman, we appreciate your comments earlier tonight. I agree with almost everything you said. I do have one thing, important area. I did bring the little paper here, which was wonderful. I certainly enjoyed it. I think I gave Mr. Fernandez a headache, but he deserved it. He created that headache, not me. It says ill-gotten gifts. Okay, where we disagree is I've never been a big fan of ethical training. If you read, I know you did, specifically what the advocate was talking about, she said that Fernandez overlooked, in quotes, every ethical law on the books. So it's not that he didn't know they existed. She described his behavior as willful blindness regarding ethical actions. Okay, the education is not going to do away with willful blindness. Okay, number one. Second thing, I agree with Mr. Baines. A lot of times we don't, but I certainly agree with him, and I think I have a quick solution. I've been going to a lot of these forums. I've talked with each of the mayoral candidates, and I ask them a simple question. I will support them if they agree to, on their first day, first week, authorize this city commission to write their own ethics policy as they see fit. I'm with Mr. Baines, tired of hearing why we can't do this and can't do that. And if in fact, and so we had at 2 public meetings, we had folks up there, and I talked to all the mayors. I also talked with the exception of Dustin Daniels didn't show up, but the others, including Daly and Vasalinda, they all agreed 100%. They were shocked when they understood that this ethics policy was written by a city attorney for the city commission, and that attorney exempted the city commissioners initially from being involved in this process. So I don't know. I wouldn't worry about your blue sky stuff. I would go ahead and start now writing an ordinance, because we have the votes. There's not going to be enough of them left. No one is going to stand up and say, no, we want to be exempt from the ethics ordinance. No, you're going to have the votes. I would start. We've got us an attorney over here. I'm going to get 2 or 3 policies I know are excellent, present that to him. Let's put together, don't worry about asking permission, let's put together a policy that you want, and by goodness gracious, I think you're going to get the policy, and that's what we want you to do for on our behalf.
Let me interject one thing.
Sure.
On that specific point. The city of Naples is pursuing having a local ethics body, and their proposed ordinance, which they did by gathering signatures, as was the case here, was drafted by a Tallahassee attorney who I suspect would say he learned from our mistakes and drafted it specifically to say that if that City of Naples ethics body is, they call it a commission as opposed to a board, if that commission is created, that they will write the ethics ordinance that they will enforce.
Right. That's C.B. Upton. He's my attorney, and he's been helping me in all these legal issues. I appreciate you bringing his name up, C.B. Upton, and he would also be more than willing to assist in this, but and he's one of those items, one of those ordinances that would be fabulous. So I wouldn't worry about working with the kind of screwball ordinance that was designed to not allow us to succeed. Keep in mind the City Commission voted 5-0 to not allow us to go forward. They fought us all the way along, so we need to just throw this thing, throw it in a can, so we'll start all over. So we're going to get you the votes on that. Third thing, the complaint area. We have a city contractor, from the mayor's office, hired by the mayor's office. He's a campaign manager and fundraiser for the mayor, Andrew Gillum. Now see if there's any conflict here. His name is Sean Pittman. What Mr. Pittman does is he goes around every year and he has a mayor's brunch. It's a political gathering. He invites legislators, African American primarily, from around the state to come to the restaurant, Edison, and they have a party, and the mayor, Andrew Gillum, is the head guy, head entertainer, etc. Well, what was reported because of a complaint I filed with the Ethics Commission, they found emails which stated that Sean Pittman and the mayor's brunch were going to get a cash discount from Adam Corey and the Edison, which is obviously a facility that's funded by the public. It certainly seems that if Fernandez, with some pushing from the public, can lose his job because he took a cash payment from the Edison, my question is, how can Andrew Gillum, the mayor, not lose his job for taking a cash payment from the same company, Edison, the same owner, Adam Corey? Okay, I think that's has already been documented by the Ethics Commission, and I think this body needs to take that on and deal with it appropriately. I can tell you that a week or two ago I did amend my complaint with the Ethics Commission. I had filed a complaint about the travel and the taking gifts in New York, and I amended the complaint to deal with the travel and taking gifts in this cash-only island they have in Costa Rica somewhere. So I have done that. I have not amended my complaint regarding this box of cash that is received by a city contractor, Sean Pittman, from a city contractor, Adam Corey, for a city mayor. Now, come on, guys. Somewhere in there's a problem, isn't there? I mean, isn't there? Like, just nod or something. Give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you're with me on this. All right, that's my third thing. My fourth thing, with all this going on, guess what happened, I think is yesterday. They're going to be voting on it tomorrow. I will not be at the City Commission meeting tomorrow. I will be in Illinois on my 50th graduated from high school reunion 50 years ago. I won't be here. And that's disappointing because they're going to vote to give Nancy Miller's family the $1.1 million contract that was subject to a audit investigation where the city auditor said, folks, this doesn't look good. This is John Buss's brother. John Buss is a big wheel in the city. John Buss was supervising this contract. They gave this contract to another vendor. Well, I and a few other people, the Democrat, talked about it, said this isn't right. Guess what happened? They gave this contract to someone who wasn't a family member. Great. I don't know who it was, don't care, but at least not a member of the family of a city commissioner or a city employee. The contractor, the city, Nancy Miller's brother-in-law, came back and complained to the city commission. They took the contract, said, oh, well, maybe we made a mistake here. Maybe we should have given it to Nancy's family. They went out, thought about it for a while, and then tomorrow they're recommending, in the middle of all this, the FBI investigation, the ethics investigation, the dang front page newspaper articles, they have the gall to come back, and they're supposedly going to vote tomorrow to give this $1.1 million to Nancy Miller's family. I'm not going to be here to scream, so I'm going to be sharing my opinions to you. I'll post them in the morning if the video camera's working. That's item number 4. The last item, and I'll sit down, the parking is a gift. You're leaving it too general. If it's not nailed down, they're going to take it. It has to be clear. It's a gift. Nobody is going to get free parking, would be my humble opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. I jumped to 11. I'm going to go back to item 10. Are there any items that any member of the board wants to have on the agenda next month? Mr. Holloman.
Well, it's actually a question about some information we had in our seats today. The RF. We're not going to talk about the RFP.
No,
okay.
That'll be discussed in July.
Yeah, and in July, we will do the RFP for legal services. I was concerned that I didn't want to do that with only 4 of us here.
That's fine. I just wanted to know.
We also, at the next, I assume at the next meeting, we're going to have to begin to talk about Julie's evaluation.
That's August.
August would do that? Okay.
Yes, and so just so the board members have a preview of what's to come, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair.
You're recognized.
Okay, thank you. We are going to have the robust discussion of, again, the stuff from the Ethics Commission on the Fernandez matter, so hopefully you all have a chance to read, digest, and bring suggestions. There will be the RFP on legal services discussed, and then we are also going to have the Chief Judge of DOA, Judge Cohen, come talk to the board about DOA, because as you know, part of the ethics ordinance that was passed was that any ethics complaint that moves through our process will be adjudicated at DOA. So I wanted the board to get a little education from Judge Cohen on how that process works, and he loves to talk about DOA. So those are 3 issues. My evaluation takes place in August.
And for the benefit of anybody who hasn't done this before, it is that we use a city kind of form. It's a multi-page form. You're going to have to schedule a little bit of time to fill it out. Since we can't meet outside the sunshine, what we did last time was everybody brought them, and during the break I did a quick tabulation, manually built a little spreadsheet, and then we and kind of averaged out the results, and we went with sort of an average, except where people wanted to change, felt strongly and wanted to change something up or down. So be prepared for that. It's, from my perspective, not fun.
You can recommend simplifying it in the next year if you want.
Well,
That's what
okay.
we've got for this year.
Okay. That said, anything else from anyone? Mr. Currington, you're looking thoughtful, shaking your head no. Ms. Davis, Ms. Solomon, Ms. Smith? No. With that, our next meeting is Tuesday, July 17th, 2018, 4 to 7 here on the second floor in the Tallahassee room, which is just to our left. And with that, we are adjourned.